Well, what?
That's as loud as you could crack it. It's just a noisy racket.
That's the sleepy sign.
Hello and welcome back to the Radical Parenting Podcast. My name is Tony Shawcross.
Hey, I'm Kara Porbaugh.
And Kara picked our theme for today. It's one that's exciting to me. Kara, do you want to tell everybody what we're talking about today?
Yeah, we're going to talk about Mr. Rogers and his long-standing TV show and a couple of films and documentaries that have come out recently about him. I'm currently obsessed.
Yeah, what made you want to pick Mr. Rogers?
Yeah, I got on this jag because I was there's a Buddhist teacher here in Asheville where I live. It was Alea Dickinson. She kind of off the cuff mentioned Mr. Rogers in some way. And I went home and watched the videos after I had been at satsang with her. And the first one I watched was the Tom Hanks film. What is that one called? I mix them up. A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I was really moved by it and really surprised. Like I thought of Mr. Rogers as just kind of being this sort of harmless children's TV guy. I never really got the depth of what he was doing, at least not when I was a kid. I think I watched him a little bit maybe, but not a whole lot. And then I started watching his actual shows with my daughter, and it was like satsang with Mr. Rogers, like the way he stares into the camera and makes contact with you as if he's talking to you, and there's all these ways in which I was just so surprised that there was something relevant for me about radical parenting and radical honesty that I would have never guessed at, because he could not be more opposite of our teacher, Brad Blanton, the founder of Radical Honesty, right? Who like Brad's sort of known for being, I don't know, sort of rough around the edges and brash and bold and loud and aggressive and we also know him well enough to know that he is can be a sweet teddy bear. And but I'm interested about kindness and gentleness, which doesn't necessarily align with radical honesty, and yet I think there's some stuff that we'll talk about that is so much in line. And I got really I got a lot out of those documentaries and watching his shows with my daughter.
Well, before we get into it, I just want to riff off some of what you were just saying. And one is that when I first met Brad, I said something to him about it's not that we're not all being honest. Some of us just aren't as angry as you are. And I think that is kind of true. I think that someone like Fred Rogers, it's not that he was just suppressing himself all the time. It's that he was very disciplined probably in setting up his life to be as kind of peaceful as he was, and that was his honest true self. That's largely what that Tom Hanks movie is about. Is about the journalist not really believing that this man is who he seems to be. And yeah, I mean, Brad also even always says, it takes meditating, it takes surrounding yourself with loving people, it takes self-care to be joyful and to be in a good place. And I do think Brad had very different experiences probably growing up than Fred Rogers did, and I do think Brad has potentially more anger than a lot of people, and Brad rightfully helped me recognize that you wouldn't necessarily know thinking through your brain. You have to kind of try it on and let out the anger and let those things out, because we are taught to suppress that, and suppressing it makes it stronger, doesn't make it go away. But anyway, I do think that Fred was also being honest, and that he just had a more peaceful spirit and nature than Brad does. And we're all just born with what we're born with. And so I'm glad Brad lets his out, and I'm glad Fred Rogers let his out.
Yeah, there's even one spot, I believe it's in the documentary, because one of the more recent films is a film. Tom Hanks plays Mr. Rogers, and it's based on real life. And it's based on this magazine writer who wrote this story on him and was really moved by meeting him. And so I think in the documentary, they talk about anger, and they talk about, like, that it was absolutely not okay in their families growing up, and that it still remained a challenge for them throughout their lives to express anger. And so I think it's cool how Mr. Rogers does it in the show, because he's playing all of the puppets. He's doing all of those voices.
Mm-hmm.
And he's sort of like expressing all these different aspects of himself through the different characters. And so even though Mr. Rogers, in sitting as a human being in front of the camera, he doesn't get mad on camera, right? But he brings it up like every chance he gets. I even remember the last show I watched with him, there was he often has guests who will come and like read a poem or play the saxophone or jump rope or whatever it is. And the saxophone player said, "I like to play happy music," or whatever. And Mr. Rogers, immediately goes to like, "What kind of music do you play when you're feeling sad or when you're feeling mad?" And so that's his big thing, is that all feelings are mentionable. I love that word, mentionable. And that was my favorite part of the film, actually, is that near the end of the film, the magazine writer, his father is dying, and my father just died a couple of months ago. That's probably why that particular film was so emotional for me at the time. And I saw myself in this this scene where the family is the father's obviously dying and nobody's talking about it. And I had this experience many times with my father before he was dying. We would sit around and, I wanted to talk about it, that he was dying. And so I did, and we did. And I feel sort of tearful right now talking about it. But, it was on me as like the radical honesty person to sort of bridge that gap between what's comfortable and not so comfortable. But after a while, we learned that like, I would much rather be uncomfortable and bring up like, you're dying right now. What is that like? Than to sit around and not talk about that is like even more uncomfortable. Anyway, one of my favorite quotes from the film is Mr. Rogers comes and visits this magazine writer and his father while he's dying. And he notices that they're sitting around not talking about the elephant in the room, and says, death is something many of us are uncomfortable speaking about. But to die is to be human. And anything human is mentionable. Anything mentionable is manageable. Anything mentionable is manageable. So I'm crying right now just thinking about this. He's so kind and gentle, but like that is the message of radical honesty. That anything human is mentionable. Whatever it is, we can talk about it. And that it becomes more manageable when we do talk to other people.
Yeah. I had a few things coming into radical honesty in my life that I had never talked about. And to talk about them just made me choke up. I could not speak about them. And in the first Radical Honesty retreat that I went to, I shared some things I had never spoken aloud before, and in workshops since, and in workshops that I've led. And now it just doesn't choke me up anymore. Now it's just like part of my life and part of my story and part of my background. And yeah, the first time telling them, some of them I told during my life story. We do this exercise in Radical Honesty where we spend an hour kind of telling our life story. And some of them I told during my life story. So I'm lucky I have video of me sharing those stories for the first time. And it's just so anguishing and so painful. And one of them, I just went on a little trip with some friends, a little road trip, and we drove past Pueblo, which is where my grandma lived. And one of my most painful memories and most traumatic experiences involved the death of my grandmother, which was very traumatic and painful. And I'm not going to share it right now. But it was just shocking to me that I could tell them all that story. And I think I cried a little bit, but it's nothing like the first time I told it, It's healing to talk about that stuff.
Yeah. I was just going to say, even though Mr. Rogers, is so kind of calm and collected, he does talk about it. So there's a difference, because in Radical Honesty, we really practice fully expressing in our body and our voice and everything, expressing emotion as fully as we can, with the intent of experiencing the experience fully, so that it then comes and goes and we're on to the next experience. And so, even if Mr. Rogers doesn't do that, he writes all these songs about what do you do when you're mad? I forget exactly how it goes, and he says, do you bang on the lowest keys of the piano, or, do you swim as hard as you can, or stuff like that. And it just comes up so many times in his songs. There's one that I'll pull up here if I can get around to it.
So early on, I don't know if you guys can all see this, but early on in my work with Radical Honesty, I kind of wondered, you're practicing. If you spend a lot of time expressing your anger, you're practicing being angry. And I think on some level, Brad would say, yeah, we get so practiced at suppressing our anger, we need to practice expressing our anger honestly and let it out. But I did find this research from Iowa State University that did show that catharsis therapy and ruminating on anger versus kind of redirecting your focus to other things, like more Fred Rogers kind of things. This study argues and finds through the scientific method and through data that venting anger in certain ways feeds the flame, doesn't extinguish the flame. And so I really liked reading about this study. And when I shared this with Brad just said, well, we don't do catharsis here. And that's not really what Radical Honesty is about. Radical Honesty is about giving healthy release valves for things that we're suppressing, for things that are in us. And what we should be comparing is, does suppressing or releasing anger extinguish the flame or feed the flame? Not does ruminating and recalling and practicing anger versus something that maybe you would have let go anyway feed the flame. So it's a delicate kind of, the distinctions aren't major, and it's a good question to be having.
I like that answer that you were just describing, because I think I remember reading that article when you shared it. And my thought on that is, that's what we're doing in Radical Honesty, is we're trying to get to a very specific way of expressing that does help us actually get over it. Mm-hmm. Our main way of doing that is trying to get out of our interpretation. So as long as we're in the interpretation, like I know this is how it works for me. I can just get deeper and deeper and deeper into my own like rightness about my interpretation. And then as soon as I actually look the person in the eye and feel the sensations in my body, everything changes, you know. It's different. People, and we're just trained not to do that, to actually look somebody in the eye and say, I'm really mad at you. I resent you for what you said to me. And that there's something about the directness and the cleanness with which we try to take all of the interpretations out that helps us actually get over it, rather than ruminating and building our case and becoming more righteous and more angry and all of that.
Mm-hmm. And I have no question that like Fred Rogers built habits. The words we say to ourselves and the words we say to our children become the way our brain is wired. And so you can practice ways of being and ways of talking that wire your brain for anything you want. Wire your brain for being angry, wire your brain for being at peace, wire your brain for whatever. And yeah, it takes deliberate practice and sometimes even discipline to practice being who and how you want to be. I've thought about this with this job of mine. Sometimes I'm like, what it takes to be a good manager here isn't always 100% aligned with what it takes to be who and how I want to be. You know, the practice that I'm getting here at my job, running a nonprofit or media organization, in some ways really lines up with who and how I want to be for Arlo, for my son, for my partner when I'm in a relationship. Sometimes it really lines up with all that, and sometimes it doesn't. And a few years ago, I made a decision for myself that when I find those two things at odds, I'm going to choose practicing being who and how I want to be outside of my work. And I'm not going to instead just do whatever this organization needs. I'm going to find other ways for this organization to get what it needs, other than me being ways I don't like being, like a total taskmaster, a total control freak, a total, as strict as sometimes I think a good manager needs to be, as manipulative and inspiring as a good manager needs to be. In some ways, I've chosen not to do that. I really value self-reliance. An episode Karen I did a few episodes back. I really believe in people's own autonomy and their own moral compasses, and I want to attract people who are aligned so we can work together to do something we could never do alone. But I don't want to ever manipulate people, and I think in some ways that makes me not a great manager. So
Yeah.
So if
all that what you just said about being a manager, I imagine is so relevant to being a parent too,
yeah.
Right? Like, how do I be the person that I want to be, which is basically loving and kind and accepting, and including in that loving and kind and accepting means loving and accepting anger and discomfort and conflict and all the things that are human, right? Loving and being loving and kind and accepting with all of that, without being, a taskmaster or a manipulator or whatever as a parent. Also, when it comes to this manipulation thing, there's something that's just so pure, right? About that he really wants every child to know that they are loved and accepted and special exactly the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel emotional even just saying that. Like that could be my only job as a parent, my only job. If my daughter feels loved and accepted exactly as she is, then my job is done, right? And so I think he does that with, the eye contact and he talks about I and you. And I feel like that's almost like 50% of radical honesty right there, right? It's like eye contact and speaking directly with I and you. I appreciate you. I resent you. I like you. I want to sit next to you. If there's an I and a you in there, you're probably doing some form of radical honesty and making eye contact, right? And then one of my favorite things about what he does is he has all these he has all the emotional stuff, right? Where he's got all these puppets and songs and different things that talk about all the different ways that people feel when different things happen. And then there's this other side of Mr. Rogers where he has guests come in and demonstrate instrument. And my daughter loves that stuff. It amazes me, actually. And it's fascinating to me too. Like, I don't know how crayons are made. So there's something about, this is the part that really reminds me of Brad. You know, Brad is so grounded in like what is real and what is concrete and what is actually here. And he really believes that that is what is nourishing to us as human beings, not necessarily being in our ideas and in our like mental world, but really being in the physical world, in our bodies, in our environment, that is nourishing as human beings, and that we lose touch with that a lot. And I really think that's what Mr. Rogers is doing, is he's helping kids. You know, he's not doing these manipulative messages that sometimes cartoons and other things have. They're like trying to put this like moral tale in there, or like put in some little, you know, morality fable and something about how you should or shouldn't be. And he's just saying, like, look at this wide world and all this stuff there is to be curious about. I remember seeing one show for like, he gets out the vacuum cleaner and he kind of shows different parts of it. And then he says, I'm going to turn it on now. And he turns it on. And, you know, it's like a vacuum cleaner from 1978 or something. And he vacuums with it. And literally for like a minute of like a 20-minute show, he's not talking. He's just vacuuming like in real time, right? Same thing. There was a show where he painted a porch swing. And I actually timed it. And it was like, I don't know, it was like 3 or 4 minutes, you know, out of a 20-something minute show where he's in real time. He's barely speaking. He's literally just painting the porch swing, you know. And compared to most television shows for children where it's like, boom, boom, bam, and there's just like so much craziness happening. It's overstimulating, even for me as an adult. You know, here's Mr. Rogers, like 4 minutes of painting.
Yeah, awesome.
But there's something about, you know, the child sees the process of like, you know, you start painting over here, and then slowly, the whole bench is covered in yellow paint. And then he comes back to it over and over again. So over the course of a week, Monday through Friday, you know, he says, okay, we can't sit on the bench because the paint is wet. And then the next day, maybe they sit on it or whatever. And he comes back to it. So there's like a real unfolding of time there where a kid is actually learning something real about how things unfold over time. And that's, you know, I don't know, there's just something really I love about that, letting things unfold in the actual amount of time that they take. Mm-hmm. That's where kids are at. They're in the real unfolding of time. Everything is new to them and fascinating. And it's fascinating to sit and watch a bench be painted for 4 minutes.
Mm-hmm. And it contributes to them having patience to do those things and not just needing to jump to the next thing. My son is like so, you know, ADD sometimes and you know, is so overstimulated, has so many toys. And I think a lot of that is our fault, you know, is us just surrounding him by so many toys. You're bored with that? Here's the next thing. And yeah, or us getting bored with it, you know, and wanting him to do the next thing or something instead of just sitting there. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
I had a few things I wanted to respond while you were talking through all that, but I can't even remember what they were. So I'm going to just share this letter that I think I've already sent to you that that really illustrates a lot of what you just said. That's Kara's daughter, Elsie Jane, yelling in the background.
Cool. That's my daughter. Yeah, I'll be right back while you share.
So one of my closest friends, Jamie Laurie, one of the MCs of the Flowbots band, sent a note to Fred Rogers when he was a young boy, probably about 5 or so. I think he's a little younger than me, so about 5. So I'm going to just show that really quick, and it just really illustrates so much of what Kara was just saying. And this isn't, an important part of Fred Rogers' legacy, but it's just one little letter that he wrote to one little kid. So this was to Jamie Laurie, and he wrote, "Jamie, your letter was special to me because it came from you. And I'm sorry you had to wait this long for an answer." Not that it needs saying, but just like illustrates what she's talking about. Kara said, if I can just teach Elsie Jane that she's perfect just as she is, every kid is special to him just because of who they are. It's just how they were born. It gave me a good feeling to know you like the song Look and Listen Carefully. I'm glad you like to think about using your eyes and ears well. That is important. What do you like to look at carefully? What do you like to hear? I also like the way you wrote your letter all by yourself. It takes a lot of practice to write well, and I'm proud of you. You are special. Your television friend, Mr. Rogers. And he probably wrote millions of, he didn't write, he dictated, as this indicates, but he probably wrote thousands and thousands of letters like this, and they all just have this consistent message, and so aligned with, not that we need to always drag things back to radical honesty, but it's so aligned with radical honesty about using your eyes and ears. And thanks for letting me share that.
So much of children's, I almost started to say propaganda, but the material is about entertaining them, keeping them busy, right? Keeping them occupied. And I think that Mr. Rogers really wanted to serve and be helpful on a deeper level, and actually be of service to children in their growing and in their lives, to teach them that, yes, you can do such and such, you can make things, you can paint things, you can use your eyes and ears to learn things. And he addressed almost every topic that you could possibly address, right? I mean, he has hundreds of shows, maybe thousands. I don't know. It was 20 years, right, of shows. Yeah. And, I haven't seen all of these, but things like...
I think it might have been 51. Oh, no, he didn't do 51 years. It was the 51st anniversary recently. But yeah, divorce, racial equity, when JFK died, just death,
assassination,
violence,
right. And I saw one show, actually it was a series. I'm really impressed with how he builds things up over the week. I didn't, as a teacher, I see that and I'm like, wow, he's designing every part of this to build on each other. He had one series over the course of a week on moving, which he had some help, by the way. There was a child psychologist at I think it was the University of Pennsylvania, that was a mentor for him, that really helped him understand children's development and mental patterns and stuff. And
Margaret McFarland.
Yeah. So I wish this woman would have written books or something, because she sounds amazing from what I've read about her. And she helped him to design his show the way that it's designed. So, she gets a lot of credit here too. But something like moving, for adults, we're like, okay, moving, it's hard, new house, new job. It's a pain, it's all the stuff. But for a kid, it's their whole world goes upside down. I mean, which we don't often get into a child's mind that way, to think what is it like to actually move when you're a child, and to have no control over the decision, You didn't get to decide to move, leave your friends behind, move into a no house, whatever it was. So he did this whole, each show had a different approach to moving. Like there was one where he showed, there was like a dollhouse and the dolls were moving, right? Another one was he showed a video of people moving. And he said, look, the movers are taking the furniture and putting it in the truck and then driving to the new house and then putting it in the new house. There was one where he's somebody in the land of make-believe is moving. And the puppets and the characters are going through this move and there's trials and tribulations. So there was probably more that I'm not remembering, where he just came back to it over and over and over again, quietly and calmly describing what's happening. So versus giving a child a lecture about you're going to make new friends and it's going to be okay, and you probably feel sad sometimes too, he's really just giving a kid an opportunity to multiple times kind of have this experience in a very descriptive way. And that is so inspiring to me in a very radical honesty way of in talking to our children and sharing with our children. I really think it comes down to the more specific and descriptive we can be, the more intimate we can be. Because we're really talking about, the furniture, is moving into the truck and noticing how we feel about that. And children are so much better than us at doing this, right? At noticing. So I get to noticing and being in that space with my daughter of noticing and describing.
Yeah.
And I think that really helps children to process what they've got all this information coming in all the time. And I think the service that we can do as adults is mainly to say, to describe and be yes, this is what's happening, or this is what's about to happen. And being in it with our child on that level of describing what's really here, what's really happening right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if people need to even hear this, but again, this is kind of part of the core ideas of radical honesty, is that the first time we see a piece of furniture, we grok it in a way we will never grok it again. We look at the curve of the wood, we feel in a different way than we ever will again. And the next time we look at that furniture, we put it into a category of furniture or something we've already kind of understood. And then the next piece of furniture, we don't sit there and feel the curves of the wood in the same way again. We kind of relate to it in recollection of previous furniture, which allows us to, be a lot more efficient and whatnot. But eventually we start only relating to the world through categories and concepts, and we stop really relating to the world through precepts. And our brain becomes so quick at translating a perception into a concept that a lot of us don't know the difference anymore. We don't know the difference between looking at something and acknowledging it as it is versus the story we've made up in our brain, or how it's, being related to things in our past or whatever. So it is a core practice of radical honesty. And it helps with a lot of things. It helps with connection with others, because the shared experience is out there in the world and these objective things that we're looking at and seeing and hearing. And we can connect around those in a way that's usually a little deeper than what we can connect around in our brains, because our own subjective experience is never really the same. It's also, the stories and the meanings we make up in our brain are the source of most of our stress. So it helps us, relieve stress sometimes to kind of get out of our heads and into our senses. But I wanted to say that Margaret McFarland woman, she did start a like a counseling center and was just like started a school of thought with Benjamin Spock and Eric Erickson. So like she was, I mean, it's just, she was doing awesome work, and I had never learned about her involvement with Fred Rogers until we decided to do this episode. Fred, and I learned more about Eric Erickson too, and these stages, life stage, but these 8 life stages, which it's just so cool. There's so much to learn about kids and developmental psychology. And yeah, I mean, she was working with 2 of the like most preeminent people in child psychology. So so Fred had some good people working with him. I also wanted to say that I love his arguments for saving PBS. I work kind of in community media, and for me, it's not even as much what he said. Like, he tugs on the heartstrings. People make decisions based on heart more than logic. But for those who want to make a decision about PBS based on logic, PBS has a bigger opportunity to level the playing field for our kids than almost anything. It's not like we want kids reliant on TV screens and stuff like that, but like, he brought Eric Erickson, Dr. Spock, and Margaret McFarland to poor kids all around the country. He brought like amazing parenting to kids of parents who could not spend the time that Kara and I spend reading all these books and obsessing over our parenting styles. He brought amazing parenting to kids whose parents didn't have the privilege of being able to be the parents that they might have otherwise been if they had had the resources and money. So for me, that's like the biggest argument for public broadcasting and PBS is like, it can level the playing field. It can give kids who don't have the advantage of the childhood that Elsie Jane and Arlo have. Stuff that they need, skills that they need, knowledge that they need, training that they need. And you guys watch a lot of PBS stuff, right?
Yeah. Well,
no,
she likes, no, not as much as like, she has a very few shows that she likes and watches over and over again. We haven't gotten that much in. She loves PBS Kids, like games. They have these amazing games. I won't let her have anything on her Kindle hardly, but PBS Kids. Yeah.
Sorry, our connection is bad. But you mentioned
Daniel Tiger, who's based on Mr. Rogers.
I didn't know that.
Not the same.
No, but he is a PBS Kids.
Yeah, Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood is based on Tiger's Neighborhood is based on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, but it's all animated and it's totally different.
Yeah.
Oh, which reminds me, the music is amazing on Mr. Rogers. Like, it's all live. He has a freaking live jazz pianist improvising the whole show, right?
Yeah.
Like, when's the last time you heard any children's or adult show with freaking live music, right?
And he wrote and composed most of it, right?
Years. And he wrote and composed all this stuff. And the songs are like so good. There's especially like the one, maybe we could even play it. There's one that's called Daniel Tiger Thinks He's a Mistake. And there's this whole duet that happens. It's all contrapuntal and like, I'm a professional classical musician. And I could totally geek out on like Mr. Rogers' children's songs. They're so good. It's one of those things like the doing stuff in real time, and having live music. And he uses the same puppets for 20 years.
Can you hear this?
Well, for one thing, I've never seen a tiger that looks like me.
No.
And I've never heard a tiger that talks like me.
No.
And I don't know any other tiger who lives in a clock.
No, neither do I.
Or loves people.
Oh, Daniel.
Sometimes I wonder if I'm too tame. Sometimes I wonder if I'm a mistake. I'm not like anyone else I know. When I'm asleep or even awake, sometimes I get to dreaming that I'm just a fake. I'm not like anyone else. Others I know are big and are wild. I'm very small and quite tame.
You are.
Most of the time I'm weak and I'm mild. Do you suppose that's a shame?
Oh, no.
Often I wonder if I'm a mistake. I'm not supposed to be scared, am I? Sometimes I cry and sometimes I shake, wondering, isn't it true that the strong never break? I'm not like anyone else I know. I'm not like anyone else.
I think you are just fine as you are. I really must tell
It's so
you
sweet. I love the duet at the end, and they're both, it's like there's both feelings going on at the same time of like, I wonder if I'm a mistake and I'm too tame. And then at the same time, this unconditional acceptance of like, what the woman is singing. So sweet.
Yeah.
And the music is so good.
Yeah.
And what I'm looking at, by the way, is mrrogers.org. And it has every 2 weeks they put up 5 fresh episodes. And what I like about that is you can see them from Monday through Friday, and there's often a theme that's developed over the course of several shows. And there's all these other things on the website too, where there's this whole thing about the messages with different songs and things. There's special guests and neighbors, and he's had everyone from like Yo-Yo Ma to like all kinds of different guests, and he, I feel like, was ahead of the curve too on having so many different guests of different skin colors, of different ethnicities. And he started broadcasting in like 1960s. And there's the famous thing, where he has, it wasn't a guest, but the police officer on African-American guy who's like this incredible opera. And there was some unrest going on at the time about white people not wanting to swim with black people. And he did a show where he, addressed that by, they were like washing their feet on a hot day.
Officer Clemens.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Oh, I found the song. I'm going to share it with you guys. And I am actually not sure.
Sometimes people are good. That's it. If you know it, sing it with me,
And I
will you?
can't hear it.
Sometimes people are good, and they do just what they should. But the very same people who are good sometimes are the very same people who are bad sometimes. It's funny, but it's true. It's the same, isn't it, for me? And sometimes people get wet, and their parents get upset. But the very same people who are wet sometimes are the very same people who are dry sometimes. It's funny, but it's true. It's the same, isn't it, for me? And sometimes people make noise, and they break another's toys. But the very same people who are noisy sometimes are the very same people who are quiet sometimes. It's funny, but it's true. It's the same, isn't it, for me? Isn't it the same?
sweet.
Awesome.
Yeah. And what I love about that is that he's saying, like, basically, we don't need to put labels on ourselves. We're always changing. There's nothing about us that isn't going to, like, also be the opposite, be true at some point, I love the part about, like, the very same people who are wet sometimes are the very same people who are dry sometimes.
I don't know.
But there's something.
I don't know if it's important, but like part of why I like that is, it's also not that significant. Like we put so much significance in being good sometimes and bad sometimes. We don't put
Right.
as much significance on dry and wet. So I don't know. I don't know if that was intentional, but that's why I like it.
Yeah, it's just, it kind of takes a little bit of the pressure off, right? Of like, that there's not one right way to be, that, like, and if I get mad, that doesn't mean I'm, like, not a good person anymore. He's giving us permission to, like, mess up, make mistakes, be different from moment to moment, and that there's no one right way to be. And, like, even saying stuff like, having your parents get upset at you, like, that's hard for a kid to know that, like, the big people are upset with you. And it's like, it doesn't mean as much as we think it means, and that everything is changing. We can get upset and then be happy 5 minutes later. And it's such a core message of radical honesty, right? That, like, the truth is always changing, and we're just here to go along for the ride and to see what comes up next and ride those waves.
Yeah. It's a pretty cool experience. Life. It is. It's cheesy to say, but it is.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Kara, for suggesting doing this on Fred Rogers. I didn't know how it was going to play out, but I'm really glad we did it. We'll leave some links to give you more chances to see more of the great work that he did, and the 5 episodes every other week that Kara mentioned, which hopefully you can share with your kids. Yeah. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you in another week for another episode of the Radical Parenting Podcast.
Bye.